Hello, legacy builders, and welcome back to another episode of the Legacy Pre-Game Podcast. I am Marcella Mollon-Williams, behavioral financial advisor for first generation legacy wealth builders. And today I am excited to welcome a powerhouse family law attorney and founder of prenup.com, Aaron Thomas. I always have to remember to put the S, prenups.com. Aaron is a three-time winner of Atlanta's Divorce Attorney, so Best Divorce Attorney, and one of the nation's top experts in family law issues. A graduate of Harvard Law School, Thomas has represented over 1,000 clients, including NBA Hall of Famers, Super Bowl winners, and Grammy Award winning artists in a range of family law matters, including divorce, custody, child support, and prenuptial and postnuptial agreements. After years of helping clients navigate difficult divorces, he decided to launch prenups.com to help couples establish a solid financial foundation during engagement so they could prevent common marital disputes. And we're going to talk about that. Thomas is the author of The Prenup Prescription, which I have right here, and he regularly shares his information in podcasts and media outlets throughout. So, Aaron, welcome to the Legacy Pregame Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Marcella. I am honored to be here, excited for this conversation.
Likewise, I've been looking forward to this, Aaron. Thank you. I wanted to have this conversation, and when I did a search for prenups, you came up. You were the one that I saw, and when I saw your content, I knew you were the one that I wanted to have this conversation with. It was just something about the way you brought this could be taboo or uncomfortable conversation to the front. And I really enjoyed that. So I knew I wanted to have this conversation with you. So how about we just get right into it? Okay.
Let's get into it.
So I like to start with just getting people familiar with a little bit of your background. And from a previous conversation, I know that you kind of went from a public defender to family law. And as I mentioned in the bio, you handle some celebrity cases and all of that there. So you transitioned from representing the poorest of the poor to the wealthiest of the wealthy. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that journey and really how those extremes shaped your perspective on how money really impacts relationships and legacy building, both for you personally and professionally.
Yeah. Thanks for opening with that. I like you said, I started off as a public defender. I really did not originally have an interest in doing family law. I was having a great career representing the poor, and I think most people are aware of the challenges that people who do not have money, people who do not have resources, may have with the legal system. And at least in my view, people who are wealthy, people who have money, like they've got it easy, don't they? Like, what problems could they potentially face? And so getting into family law, I was recruited by a family law attorney in Atlanta, where I live. And everything that I learned in that first year of doing family law was an absolute shock to me. Just having money does not save you from the kinds of problems that people have in their marital relationships, particularly as it pertains to their relationship with money and their financial relationship with each other, which I didn't even know was a thing. I have a financial relationship with my spouse. I know I have a personal relationship or a romantic relationship, but there is also that financial relationship, as I know all too well. And so that was my introduction to family law, and yeah.
And yeah, so you dealt with that shock, and I remember reading that in I believe it's the intro of your book. So I'm still making my way through the book. I I can only imagine what that was like, and I even know from the book it impacted you as far as you not wanting to be married at first. Now you're married, right? But and then I saw that your parents, had been married for, I think it's 57 years or so at the time when you wrote the book in 2023. So,
That's
yeah.
right. That's right. I mean, when I started in family law, I wasn't married myself. Most of my friends were not married. I was late 20s, early 30s. My parents are still together. They just celebrated 59 years in August now. So I think it was 57 when I wrote the book. And so I really didn't know what divorce looked like. I had no idea what I was getting into. And what I realized is that marriage is the most important financial contract that anyone ever enters into in their entire life. And I know we don't think about it as a contract, but it is. Legally, marriage is a contract. You are giving those vows, but there's a contract. Unfortunately, nobody reads the fine print of that contract until they're actually in it. But it has wide ranging implications for your financial life. And I was blown away. And yes, you're right. It scared me off of marriage. I was like, why does anyone even do this? Just just date, or you can live together. It's the 2000s. You can live together. You can throw a big party. You can wear a white dress. You can change your last name if that's the kind of thing you're into, but don't actually go through with the wedding because people don't know what they're setting themselves up for. And like you mentioned earlier, I'm now married myself. I believe my views on the topic have evolved over time, and I think that it is just incredibly important to know what the contract is that you're signing when you're getting married, and to customize that contract. To think about what your relationship is going to be with your spouse as it pertains to finances, and not just accept kind of like the default or go in and wing it.
Yes. No, thank you for sharing that and your personal history with that. And I wanted you to touch on that because I think for so many of us, yes, we live in a society where 50% of marriages or more at this point, maybe, end in divorce. You would know. And so we see it a lot, but there are people like you who, people like me who are, I also had all I saw was marriage and with my parents too, a healthy, loving marriage. And so the thought of divorce is not something that you even want to think about, that you understand how to process. And so for those listeners, that's one aspect of it, that just needs to be faced. That is the reality check, is that it can happen. And I love also what you shared in your book about meeting your spouse, and you went from one mindset to a different one. However, there was still a maturity in which both of you came into your relationship with, because it wasn't just the feelings of love and romance, but because of what you did for a living and her experiences, and also being an attorney, that you both had a level mind about this contract that you just talked about, this very important financial contract that marriage is. And I want to know, why do you think that so many couples overlook this financial side of marriage? Because I want a different perspective here, because I'm dealing with that, and I would love to hear from you, your experience. Why is it? Why is that the case?
Yeah, it's a great question, Marcella. I think there are a couple of reasons. I think that one, no one wants a messy divorce. I don't feel like that's a controversial statement to start with. And there are two ways to prevent that. One is you don't ever get divorced, right? And that's about as far as most people get. And two is to think about what would happen, what would we actually do, what would be fair in the unfortunate event that we did get divorced. So, in other words, to have a plan. Those are the two ways to do it. Most people just say, we're not going to get divorced. That's it. I'm going to leave it alone. It's that kind of not me thinking about it. Um, and then also, it is not something that it's not romantic to think about the potential end of your relationship. And so we don't want to go down that path. Some people feel like it's even jinxing themselves to even have the conversation about it. And I think that the other reason why it is difficult for people to wrap their minds around the financial relationship is because it is more difficult for our generation than it was for our parents' generation or our grandparents' generation. So even if we had kind of healthy marital models exhibited for us growing up, um, it is we can't just do what our parents did. So the example I like to give is my parents got married in the 1960s, in 1966, and marriage looked very different for them than it does for us. The average couple was 21 years old. Both spouses were 21 years old when they got married. That average couple, they had maybe one bank account between the two of them. Student loans weren't anything like they are today. Credit cards didn't really exist. They were just coming around. 401ks didn't exist back then. The average couple in the 1960s getting married at age 21, maybe they had a car and a bank account. They had no house, no business, no retirement, no assets, no real debts to speak of. And so they were starting their financial relationship as a blank slate. They could build all of their financial habits and practices together. And then you compare that or you contrast that with the average couple that gets married today. The average couple getting married today is age 30, very often much older than that, right? And that couple is likely to have 4 or 5 bank accounts each, 3 to 4 credit cards each. They both got their own cars. Somebody's got a small business. Somebody's got a retirement account. Student loans can be in the 6 figures easily. You could have equity in a condo. You could have stock options in your company. And so uh, if the couple getting married back in the 1960s, they're a complete blank slate. It's like they're starting a business from scratch. They're a startup in your garage. And you compare that with the average couple getting married today, it is a corporate merger in terms of complexity. And I don't think that people recognize that because we're looking at our parents as the example, and we don't recognize we're in a completely different situation when it comes to the complexity of joining our finances, and maybe more important than the assets and the debts on the ledger and the number of credit cards you have is you've built up your own financial habits for a decade or more since the time that you moved out of your parents' house. And so trying to get all of those on the same page can be more difficult than just joining the bank accounts alone. And so we're dealing with a much more complex situation when it comes to getting married and our financial relationships.
Thank you for breaking that down because I think sometimes we really don't look at the perspective of where we are as far as where the economy is today, where people how people are positioned today, and how our parents were. And that's so important. And sometimes, unfortunately, even the older generation, they'll judge, you know, the next generation. And so that fear of or that guilt or shame, and that's how form it is shame around money is formed.
Mhm.
It's layered on top of everything else that they're dealing with. And I love that you went back and talked about that relationship that our parents had around money and building from scratch. Also adding that, in the 60s, the man was the primary breadwinner typically, and the financial responsibility in most households rested with him. And so, therefore, the wife was usually in a more submissive role and allowed him to take that role while she had her role and took care of the household, the kids. And it was a agreed upon union in many households. 60s going back. So there was a mindset around that. And now you're talking about two independent individuals who are making their own money coming together, as you just mentioned, the merger, the corporate merger. And that's such a great way to frame it and look at what's actually happening with us. So let's talk about that a bit more. How can couples practically apply that mindset about being, coming together as a corporate merger and do it in a way where they're not making love feel transactional, but we can apply the relationship, the love and the affection of the relationship, but hey, let's get serious about what we're actually doing here as well.
No, no, that's absolutely right. And I love the point you make about the advancements that society has made in terms of, men and women's roles in the household. There may be one checking account and one earner in that old household, and now two people are coming together. And I've always had my own money. I've always had my own bank accounts. It's a little more difficult to get on the same page. And so, I would say, let's look at that corporate merger analogy and say, if you were joining your company with another company, what would you want? What would you demand at the beginning of that? And the first thing is transparency when it comes to the finances. Um, I know that that is a difficult thing for some people to wrap their minds around because putting out your net worth statement is not something you're typically going to do on a first date or even a third date or a 10th date. And what people find is they are already getting engaged, or God forbid, they're at the altar and they don't know the first thing about their spouse's finances. And I can tell you from having done family law for almost 2 decades now, nobody likes to be surprised after already married to find out that their spouse has tens of thousands in credit card debt, or they have, or they're carrying, big interest payments every month, or that there's $100,000 in student loans that they didn't know anything about. And because of that shame that you talk about, we don't necessarily want to put those things out there. We all feel like we should be further along in our financial journey than we are. We feel like we should have more saved up. We feel like we should have less in debt. And so we don't share that information with each other. And that's the first thing is you have to get transparent with all of your finances, your assets, your debt, your income, put it all out there. Call it a no judgment zone, so you can honestly talk about what it is. It's just a point in time. It does not define you where you are in your financial journey. And then that will naturally start to spur other conversations about, okay, how did we get here? What are your financial habits? Do you carry debt on your credit cards, or are you paying them off in full every month? Do you try to max out your 401k, or are you more into alternative investments, or are you trying to start a side business? Are you more into real estate? And you can start to have those kinds of conversations that naturally come from first being transparent with all of your finances coming into the relationship.
I love that. See, this is the other reason I was excited to have you on this show because we have similarities in our approach to marriage and finances, and we both teach couples to treat the household like a company, and how to have certain roles. I know I think we both use the term selecting a chief financial officer, and I use a chief operating officer, but you use another term.
Yeah, well, I usually talk about the chief financial officer.
Okay.
Yeah,
Chief
and then I
financial.
refer to both parties or both spouses as shareholders of the
Okay, that's what
relationship.
it was. Both parties as shareholders, and that's right. And then, so we define these roles, and then you have these regular shareholder meetings, right? That's what
Yeah,
we're talking about. So let's talk about that because I know the audience like, wait a minute, shareholder meetings. What are you talking about here? So, what advice do you have for couples who struggle with this transparency that you're talking about here? Who especially with those, who are spenders and savers, and you have all these different dynamics. How can they avoid? How could they make sure they're not avoiding these money conversations, but they can have these shareholder meetings in that no judgment zone and learn to be comfortable with this?
yeah. So first I would say that you can recognize that every couple is going to be different, and you do not have to have the exact same financial framework as all of your friends do or as your parents did. And so, after you have been transparent, you've laid out all of your finances, your assets and debts, you're starting to have these conversations. You can recognize that every couple is going to be different, and you do not have to have the exact same financial framework as all of your friends do or as your parents did. And so, after you have been transparent, you've laid out all of your finances, your assets and debts, you're starting to have these conversations. I think the next important thing to do is decide what's mine, what's yours, and what's ours. Both in terms of assets and debts, but also in terms of income and how the money is going to flow. Most couples that are getting married who are in their 30s or beyond are not going to shut down all of their other bank accounts and just have one checking account between the two of them that they use for everything, every single expense. Um, Nor do I necessarily think it is the healthiest way to go about things. And so I think it's important for couples to determine how is the money going to flow in our relationship. And so most couples find that it is helpful to have at least one joint bank account so that the joint bills can be paid from that. And both spouses will contribute to that bank account in some form or fashion. Some people do what I call inside out, where it's a more traditional model that maybe our parents use, where all of the income goes into one joint checking account, one bank account, and then they transfer money out to themselves to have for their own, discretionary spending. Some people might even call it an allowance, but some kind of allotment that each spouse has so they can maintain that autonomy that they're used to having over some of their spending money. And then some couples will do what I call outside in, where their incomes will go into their separately titled bank accounts, and then from there they will contribute to the joint expenses by transferring the money into a joint bank account. And I like using the joint bank account just because if you're going to be together for 30, 40, 50 years, there's only so many times you can Venmo the mortgage payments and the utilities back and forth to each other. At some point, it becomes easier to pay those from a joint account where both spouses have visibility. They can see the bills coming in, they can see the money going out. Um, and that I think is kind of a good next step for people rather than just saying, okay, I guess we got to combine every single dollar that we have in one bank account and, agree on everything going forward. And then, like you said, have regular check-ins because um, couples, people today, we are not great about talking about money. There is something taboo about it. There is the shame. People are embarrassed about it. People are very sensitive about their income, about their debt, and so you have to put it on the calendar. You have to make it a regular thing that you do for the maintenance of your marriage. And yeah, I like to call it an annual shareholders meeting, the same way that if you were in a company on a quarterly basis, which is a good idea as well for couples, but at a bare minimum on an annual basis, you're going to sit down, you're going to say, these are the finances of the household or our organization. This is what our budget looked like. This is what we spent last year. Here's what we have coming up next year. Maybe we need to replace somebody's car. Maybe we need to replace the hot water heater in the house. We have big expenses coming up. Can we budget for travel or the other things that are important in our lives? Maybe this is the year that we have a baby or that we put a down payment on a house. And rather than just let these decisions be made by kind of one party in the relationship, or they're made haphazardly, or they're made without sufficient communication, you have a set time that you sit down and you have an agenda to say, okay, we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about the budgets, we're going to talk about upcoming expenses, we're going to update each other on our assets and debts that are not already shared, and have this open forum so that we can have the conversations that need to be had to maintain the communication for a healthy financial relationship.
Oh, that's so good. You said so much there that's helpful. But then I have to realize, okay, you mentioned about how uncomfortable these conversations are, and you and I are comfortably talking about money and the shareholders meeting. But I have to pause and just address my legacy builders. These are first gens we're talking about here, and when I'm working with first gens, working with our clients, I have to take the time to really unpack their money memories and understand why it's so challenging to
Mm.
have these conversations in the first place. Digging a little deep. And when I'm working with couples, the first thing we do is pull out your credit reports and rip that band-aid off and start getting transparent. That's the first thing before we even have our first conversation. And so I say that because the conversation, the language we're using, money language right now. And so listeners may be thinking, but wait a minute, we're talking about prenups. Why are y'all talking so much about money and preparation when prenups are all about when you get a divorce? What to do when you get a divorce? And especially for first gens, this is not something that you grew up aware of. Your dad or mom didn't say, all right, son, daughter, make sure you have a prenup before you get married. So I would love to hear your perspective because your approach to prenups is a way of protection, not just for divorce, but it's like a maintenance. There are things that you talk about and that you allow people, or frameworks that you allow people to set up within this prenup. Like you include things like mandatory financial transparency, counseling clauses, and I think spending thresholds. So can you share some examples of how these frameworks have helped couples experience more freedom and security instead of them just focusing on the divorce thing? And I want them to reshape their idea of prenup being a taboo word. Like you said, jinxing the relationship. So help me reframe this for our listeners. How can we use prenups as a framework for creating freedom in their relationship?
Yeah, yeah, great points. I think that let's step back and define what a prenup is. Um, a prenup is really just a set of rules that governs your financial relationship with your spouse, both during marriage and, yes, if necessary, in a divorce. And I like to emphasize that because before I got into family law, I used to think the same thing that I'm sure some of the listeners are thinking, which is, wait a minute, why are we talking about financial rules during the marriage? I thought a prenup was just how you split up everything if and when you get divorced. And as it turns out, you can't define what would be fair in a potential divorce years down the road without defining what's fair during the marriage itself, right? And so we've got to talk about, if you could say we'll split everything that we have in joint names 50-50, and everybody keeps whatever they have in their individual names. That's what we're going to put in our prenup. That could either be totally fair or completely unfair, depending on what it is you're doing with your money and your assets during the marriage itself. I have done divorces where, the couple set up a joint account, and for some reason, one spouse put their income in that joint account and the other one didn't. And they continued in that fashion for 10, 15 years, and it just ate away at their relationship. And so, I am all about using the tools that we have available to us to like I said, avoid messy divorces. And a big part of that is reducing the friction and the predictable, preventable arguments that couples always have during the relationship about money. And it's no shock to anyone that one of the biggest things married couples fight about is money. So if we can attack that at the root by going to the beginning of the relationship and thinking about how are you structuring the bank accounts? What rules do you have for transparency? And so, the first thing, and this is talking about transparency, this isn't just for the health of your relationship. For a prenup to be enforceable, and this is true in all 50 states, both spouses have to disclose all of their assets and debts to each other. And like you said, it's an opportunity to just rip that band-aid off. And what I find is often once a couple has done that, once they've been kind of financially naked, for lack of a better way to put it, at the beginning of the relationship, it's much easier to maintain that going forward. It's when you have things that are secretive at the beginning of the relationship that the longer you go, the more difficult it is to come clean and to be transparent about what your financial picture looks like. So, um, I like to say that's number one is starting off with transparency. Number two is deciding how the money's going to flow. Are you going to do inside out? Are you going to do outside in? How are you going to contribute to the expenses? Are you going to, contribute equal amounts to the joint expenses, or is it going to be pro rata with your income? How do we, if one spouse takes a step back from the workforce or stays home to raise kids, how do we make sure that spouse still has access to money? And that they feel that they're being treated fairly in the relationship. And then, yes, I go on to the annual shareholder meeting where you have an agenda, you have a set time to sit down and talk about financial issues. And then when you talk about those couples who are, there's one spender and there's one saver in the relationship, one way to address that is by saying, okay, the joint account is only used for joint expenses, and you use your discretionary money to pay for your discretionary expenditures. And that way you don't have to argue about any expense, every expense that you want to make, but also everything that comes out of the joint account over a certain amount. So for some couples, it's 250. For some couples, it's 500. It may be 1,000. It may be $5,000. There's a discussion before large expenditures happen out of the joint assets. The same way that no one wants to be surprised with, huge credit card debt that they didn't know existed. No one wants to look at the joint bank account and it's been drained because of some expense their partner made that they didn't know about. And some people recoil at the idea of checking in with their spouse. Oh, I got to ask permission. I earned some of this money myself. I got to ask for permission to spend my own paycheck, money that I earned. And I say it's not about asking for permission. It's about respect. It's about respect for taking an action that impacts the household. If you spend money from the joint account over a certain amount of money, that's going to impact the relationship. And a lot of times it's just, hey, hey, babe, I'm at the store. I'm about to buy this thing. Just want to make sure you're okay with it. And it's an opportunity for the other person to weigh in. And more often than not, what couples find is they're rarely saying no. They just want the respect of being consulted before the big expenditures or the big purchases are made in the household. And these are just, like I said, a few of the things that couples can do in the context of their prenup that help to prevent those avoidable arguments about money.
Thank you for sharing that. And I feel like everything you say just it brings me so many more questions and so so many other directions we can go in. But what I heard from what you just said there reminds me of things that I teach about that I know that are uncomfortable. And two of those things are accountability, and you talked about that without using the word, but you said that thing that we don't like asking people. It feels like permission. I think a lot of times people feel like accountability is asking permission, when it's not. It's something we absolutely need. So it's accountability and discipline.
Mm,
And people don't tend to like those words, but we need them. We need them as a functioning society, and we need them as a functioning household. And what it does is, going back to that framework of freedom, what we call it here is creating freedom within a framework. And there always has to be a framework. And when you have that, you are allowed, as we're talking about in this conversation, to feel more comfortable. There is a weight that is off of you when you know that there are boundaries, and it's a safety measure for your marriage. And so it's really important for me to always help the listeners reframe and shift their paradigm about words or concepts that were built from their childhood, that they're taking into their adulthood, that is impacting their finances.
mm,
And so I really want the listeners to hear from what you're saying, the benefits of this level of accountability with one another, and how it lends to a more conducive environment, more fulfilling environment, a household peace, harmony, having those frameworks there. And then the other thing that I work with clients about is helping them elevate their financial intelligence. And the financial intelligence is defined as the ability to have smart, value-based conversations around money without being overtaken by your emotions.
mhm,
And I often bring up the three examples that we are challenged in, and that is marriage, divorce of the wedding itself,
mhm,
divorce, and death. Those are the three areas in which your emotions are heightened, and there's typically a lot of major financial decisions that need to make expensive financial decisions that need to be made. So I know the listeners have heard me say this time and time again as far as financial intelligence. And now we're here with Erin Thomas, prenups.com, and we're talking about one of those areas that I'm always talking about. So I want to make sure this is a moment where you can see that it is financial intelligence that is going to allow you to have these conversations and be able to navigate everything that Erin, you have been sharing with us, and staying consistent with it so that you can maintain this union and this corporate merger into something fulfilling and lifelong. So I just love that you're able to really bring the reality to this concept that I've been teaching with our listeners and my clients. Because, yeah, prenups, it's just not about the divorce. You have created something so powerful. And I want to read something in your book that I just love how you said this here. Let me see if I can find. Let's see. It was a couple things. When I follow the money, I saw that a marriage finances, when organized without transparency, communication, and fairness, inevitably led to chronic, deep-seated, deep-seated, far-reaching relationship problems. And then you end the page, it says, financial dynamics in a marriage dictate the personal dynamics of that marriage. And I really want, of course, I'm going to keep encouraging you all to get the book. But that was a powerful statement. Financial dynamics in a marriage dictate the personal dynamic in the marriage. That is something that people don't think about, especially the first gens. It's not the conversation we're having, and that's the conversation we're having today. So thank you for allowing me to share that. I just had to just kind of go into that a little bit. And then I want you to share you say that there are few predictable issues that you've seen in your experience. Other than money, what are some other issues that tend to come up in marriage that I think that you think the listener should just kind of know about, be mindful of?
One thing that I saw in my divorce work,
Mhm.
and again, I participated in about 1,000 divorces over the past 2 decades. So I've seen a few of these. And uh, it's very common for me to ask my clients, so did you try counseling? Are you sure this is the route you want to take? Is there any hope for reconciliation in your relationship? And a surprising number of people had really never gotten a full opportunity to go to counseling or to try to get help, whether that's from a licensed professional counselor or a pastor or a priest or a rabbi or whatever trusted individual there is that could intervene and help them in their relationship. And what I noticed is um, when a couple would reach a challenging point in their relationship, it was usually one spouse that wanted the counseling to happen. And when they go and suggested it to their partner, it came off like an accusation. Oh, you think I need counseling? You go get counseling. I don't need counseling. I'm fine. I'm not, nothing's wrong with me. And then, a year or two would go down the line. And then that other spouse would come around and be like, okay, let's go get some help. But the first spouse had already given up on the idea of counseling or maybe on the relationship itself. And so, one of the tools that my wife and I actually decided to put into our own prenup that has become one of the most popular provisions that we offer to our clients is this kind of pre-scheduled counseling, or rules about mandatory counseling during the relationship. So my wife and I agreed that if either one of us wanted to do counseling during the relationship, each of us had a trigger and we could pull that trigger and we'd have to go to 3 counseling sessions, no questions asked. Not both of us had to agree. Either one of us has the ability to pull that trigger once a year throughout the relationship. And if we actually wanted to split up, if the D word came up, we got to go to double. We got to go to 6, right? And just having that kind of already baked in framework for here is how we're going to resolve difficulty when it arises. Because, yes, you're right. A lot of the difficulty arises around financial issues. But for everything outside of that, what we can do is come up with a framework for how we're going to resolve those conflicts. And so having that baked in so it doesn't come off as an accusation that something wrong with you or that I think you got mental challenges. It is just, this is how we as a couple have decided we're going to resolve conflict. One of us is going to trigger it. We're going to go to 3 sessions. And usually once you've gotten the ball rolling there, then you can decide to kind of voluntarily continue it. Or maybe you got what you needed out of it. You've re-sparked the communication in your relationship. And that is one way to avoid that very predictable pattern that I've seen these couples run into where they're not getting the help that they need until it's too late and the relationship has completely broken down. I, like a lot of couples now, are going further than I did in my prenup. I need a revision because a lot of couples are coming and saying, we're going to go once a year no matter what. We're going to go twice a year no matter what. We're going to treat it like the annual physical, like you go to your doctor, but we're going to do that for the health of our relationship instead.
Oh, I absolutely love that. I wish I knew about or thought of that 28 years ago when I got married. That is phenomenal. That maintenance. It's that marriage maintenance. That's what that is. And I love that you said D word. My husband and I aren't allowed to use that word. We say the D word if we're talking about it. We came into our marriage very clear. We're not playing around with that. We're not using it in fun and games. No, no, no. That's the D word. So, but yeah, that is the frame of mind. And as you said it did really make me think that I really want to make sure our listeners are not afraid of the D word. Okay, that just how Aaron, you talked about just coming up front and thinking about and laying out the formula, the framework, the foundation to build on by understanding what does it take to prevent it. What does it take to prevent all the things that we're afraid of? And it's the reason why some people are afraid, again, to talk about money because there's fear around it, fear that came from what they saw growing up or what they see. We've all had some form of it. So I really want our listeners to hear what is being said today, help you to really just approach and confront these fears around these taboo conversations and be willing to have a different approach to the conversations around money and protecting your marriage and what prenups can do for the protection of your relationship. So that's what I want to make sure everyone gets from this conversation. So as we prepare to wrap up, I want to ask you one final question, Erin. Just based off of your experience, everything that you've seen in family law, good and bad, what's one lesson you want every first generation couple, the ones that we're dealing with here, every first generation couple to internalize before they say I do and before they start building a legacy together?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking me. I think that for me personally, one of the big aha moments that I had where the light bulb went off was the idea that it is possible to plan for divorce without planning to divorce. And what I mean by that is we prepare and try to hedge against any other catastrophe, financial or otherwise, that comes up in our lives, right? Like we prepare against the possibility of car accident by getting car insurance, right? We don't want to have health challenges, but we have health insurance, or we get life insurance, and it doesn't make us more likely to risk those things that we don't want to happen. Some people say, well, if I'm getting a prenup, if I'm planning for it, then like aren't I making myself more likely to do these other things? And I bought life insurance. I did not take up skydiving the next day, right? I got my car insurance policy. I did not start driving more recklessly, right? I can prepare against the catastrophe that I want to avoid and still do everything in my power to prevent that catastrophe. And I feel like marriage is no different. I feel like sometimes if we're too afraid of broaching the topic, then we're not doing anything to prepare against it. We're not doing the best things we can to protect against the potential downside negative consequences that can come from it. And so what I say is just have it can just be a hypothetical have conversation and have it at the point when your relationship is at its peak, when you love each other more than anything, when trust is at an all-time high in your relationship. You can have a hypothetical conversation. Hey, if we had to split our money up, what would be fair? And if you agree, if you both say the same thing, then great. You can put it down in writing and you can take that argument off the table for all time and you'd never have to worry about it again. Or if what you say would be fair is different, that's also good because you have now identified a disconnect in your relationship and you've done it at a time when you have the ability to work on it and come together in the middle and decide what is fair about your financial relationship. Because I will tell you, I've been on the other side of when people do not have these conversations, when they do not get on the same page. And those are the situations that end up in the messiest, most drawn out, expensive divorces. Because the truth is, you're going to negotiate the financial aspects of your relationship. You either do it at the beginning, or unfortunately, most people, a lot of people, pay lawyers to have the negotiation at that end. And so I would ask the listeners, when are you best suited to have this conversation? When trust is high, when you love each other, or do you figure out what's mine, what's yours, and what's ours when you hate each other?
So much wisdom there. This is why I truly admire what you do, Aaron. Prevention. It's the same reason why we've incorporated premarital financial counseling within our practice. It's about prevention and being mindful right when the love is strong, to have these conversations and then having an expert like Aaron to guide you through that process. Because yes, we know that you don't know what to do, how to say, if you haven't been given these instructions, if you haven't seen examples, then you may just be uncertain about the approach. And so I'm really hoping from this conversation that you got some resources, some tools, some frameworks, an opportunity to see, oh, okay, this is the language we can use in having these conversations. And if you still need more support, that's what Aaron is for. That's what he is there for. So, Aaron, this conversation was everything I hoped it would be. It was transparent, thought provoking, and filled with so much wisdom that our listeners can actually apply in real life. So I thank you so much for your time and being with us today. And of course, I want our listeners to connect with you, get a copy of your book. So please share where they can reach you.
The best place to go is prenups.com. And from there, you can order a copy of our book. It's also on Amazon. It's the Prenup Prescription: Meet the Premarital Contract Designed to Save Your Marriage. And then for those of you who are on social media, you can follow Prenup Guy on Instagram.
Prenup guy. Wonderful. Thank you. So now, before we close, I ask every guest to repeat and complete this sentence. So yours is, I am Aaron Thomas, and this is the legacy that I am living and leaving in the world.
Yes, I am Aaron Thomas, and the legacy that I'm living and leaving in the world is an intentional approach to maintaining our relationships, and making these agreements between the two of us and not in a courtroom.
That was great. Perfect. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you again for just equipping us with the insights to really make love and legacy work in alignment, because that's what it's all about, making it work in alignment. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Honored to be here.
Thank you, Aaron. Legacy builders, I want you to understand this. A prenup is a framework for communication, accountability, and protection. It's a way to bring order to love, clarity to your finances, and structure to the vision you're building as a couple. For my first generation wealth builders who are listening, this is your reminder. You don't have to repeat the patterns that you're familiar with, the patterns of confusion, conflict, or silence when it comes to money. You can build differently and protect the future you're creating. So if today's conversation spoke to you, share this episode with another legacy builder who needs the resources. And I know there's someone who needs this. And of course, do not forget to subscribe to the podcast. Until next time, live well, build wisely, and prepare with purpose.